I contacted Brandon Caswell about a possible speaker for February. And he says, "Oh, you ought to get Dean Hester. He's seen all these owls." And I said, "Okay." And so he said, "I'll contact him." So this is the first time I've talked to Dean. And I've done everything through Brandon. But Dean has a master's in paleontology. I think you work for Integrated DNA here in
Coralville.
Right. And he has, as he said, has traveled a lot over the United States and I think Canada and Mexico.
Yeah.
And so I'm very excited to have him as a speaker tonight. And I think he has a lot of information as well as great photos. And if you're not on the Facebook for Iowa Birding and the Iowa Ornithologist Union website and the Great Lakes up in northwestern Iowa, Dean's posts on a lot of those, and he has great pictures from all the different travels that he has done. So I am very happy to present Dean Hester talking about owls in the American Birding Association area.
Great. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone for having me speak and present for the Iowa City Bird Club. I've been birding in Eastern Iowa for the last 7 or 8 years now. I got interested in college. Local birder who you all probably know, Brandon Caswell, originally got me interested in birding, and from then on out, I've been hooked and traveled all over the United States and a little bit beyond, hopefully more in the future, and seen a lot of owls. And I've been lucky enough to see 18 of the 19 species of regularly occurring owl in the US. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today. So to start it off, one of the reasons owls are so interesting to us humans is that they are secretive and they're very cryptic and hard to find. And we crave to see the rare things in the world. And owls are especially famous for this. One of the primary reasons being that they're nocturnal. They're active and awake while we're asleep for the most part. And even during the day, when we're out looking for them, they're very stealthy. So in their day roosts, a lot of species of owls find very, very secluded areas to stay. Being shown here by this long-eared owl I found in central Iowa, trying to hide behind a vertical willow branch there. Not doing a very good job in this instance, but I've traveled extensively around the US and had pretty lucky encounters with a lot of species, especially owls, that have led to me being able to see all but one of the species of owls in the United States, which maybe will change the next couple months. We will see. But now you can see my hilarious photo of the long-eared owl doing its best to act secretive during the daytime. But as I said before, owls, they're difficult birds to see no matter how you slice it. They're nocturnal, they're very stealthy, they're very cryptic, they're often very well camouflaged for their environments. And another factor is that they have very small populations in most species. Even our most common North American owl, the barred owl, is estimated to have a population of only about 3 million birds. And that's in comparison to a species like indigo bunting, which, is a relatively common bird, but nothing, super obvious like goldfinches or robins or blue jays or something like that. And indigo buntings have a population of about 78 million. So we're talking about a bird that just by default, there's only one barred owl for every 30 indigo buntings out there. So there's just less owls to find. And yes, we have 19 species in the United States, many more in Central and South America and the rest of the world, but we'll get to that later. So first off, before we dig into all the different species in the US, I wanted to talk a little bit about owl anatomy because they're very, very interesting birds, very extreme birds in terms of their physiology. And one of the most interesting things about them is that for the most part, they're just a lot of air. They're just a lot of empty space. This is a really cool image I found a long time ago that I saved because it was so funny. But this is a great gray owl, effectively cross-section to show you what the interior of the owl would look like. And you can see that there's not a lot of meat in there. It's mostly just feathers. And beyond even that, the little outline you see that's the pink flesh of the owl, is in itself about 60 to 70% air. Birds are incredibly hollow. They have air sacs in their bones, they have air sacs in their stomach, they have air sacs in their chest, they have air sacs everywhere in their body. Um, Very pneumatic animals, they're full of air. And so you pick up a great gray owl, it looks like you're going to pick up something that weighs 20 or 30 pounds, the size of a small dog. And when you grab it, they're only about 2.5 pounds. Like a great gray owl is only a quarter the size of your average house cat. And they look huge and impressive when you see them in the wild, but they're really pretty little animals. Um, they're also famous for their stealth and their silent flight. And owls accomplish this through a lot of interesting morphology in their wings primarily. They have very large wings, first of all. They have a lot of surface area, which allows them to fly pretty slowly for such a big bird. They can take slow wing beats and not flap hard, which reduces the amount of turbulence they produce. And then on the front edge of the wing, they have these structures, these serrated comb-like structures on the front edge of the wings. And these act as basically little fingers that break up the incoming flow of air. And instead of one big whoosh of air flowing over the wing, it breaks it up into tiny little turbulent flows, which are much quieter. And this is useful because it makes owls silent so their prey can't hear them. And it also lets the owl use its incredible hearing to hear its prey and not be muffled by the sound of its own wing beats as it's swooping down to grab something. And of course, vision. Owls are famous for their big eyes and their incredibly acute vision. One fact you might know about owls is that the iris color is a good clue for the owl's behavior. In a general sense, owls with yellow or orange colored eyes are typically more active in, early dawn, late evening, daytime periods. They're diurnal or crepuscular. And owls with pure black eyes are usually purely nocturnal. And this isn't a hard and fast rule, but it does give you a good idea. If you see an owl with pure black eyes, it's probably a pretty strict nocturnal hunter. And the eyes of owls are also incredibly large. In some species, the eyes can equate to about 5% of the entire owl's body weight, which is pretty shocking. That'd be, like me having eyes that weighed 5 pounds. It'd be like cantaloupe-sized eyes. They're huge. And owls also have incredible control over their eyes. They have very, very acute muscular control over their pupils. So not only are owls very, very good at seeing in the dark, they can also constrict their pupils very quickly and very efficiently. And there are actually many species of owls that can see better in very bright light than humans can, which is something you don't really think about, but they have such control, they can see in bright, sudden daylight and in darkness. And then finally, the ears. Owls have exceptional hearing. It's probably their most supernatural feat. And they've taken it to an extreme in many species. In the bottom left corner here, you can see the skull of a boreal owl. And on the right-hand side of the skull, you can actually see one of the openings for the ear is pointed downwards. And on the left-hand side, the opening for the ear is pointed upwards. And owls have actually evolved asymmetrical ears so that they can hear in 3D. So they can hear if something is above, below them, to the left, to the right of them. And they can triangulate those with a very, very large brain. A large portion of an owl's brain is dedicated just to auditory input. And scientists have actually done some rather funny tests to figure this out. They've grabbed owls and they've put them in rooms that are 100% completely pitch black, like no light at all. And the owls can still track and pounce on mice with almost pinpoint accuracy using no visual input at all. And then they've also gone another step and affected an owl's face. So owls have what's called a facial disc, or many owls have a facial disc. And that's this round circlet of feathers around their face. And they use that effectively as a satellite dish to channel sound towards their ears and increase the volume of things they're hearing. And scientists, being scientists, were like, well, let's mess with that. So they've gotten owls and taped down those facial discs, taped down the feathers on their face so that they don't have their facial disc anymore, and let them hunt in a laboratory setting. And they can still get a job done, but they're quite a bit worse than they normally would be. And then once they take that, safe tape off and their facial disc puffs back out, they're great at hearing and hunting again. And then this photo on the right-hand side of the screen is actually a northern saw-whet owl with its ear flap being opened up so you can see the internal structure of the ear. And that grayish blue blob you actually see there is the back of the saw-whet owl's eye and its optic nerve going back to its brain. And that's how much space owls' eyes take up inside of their heads, that they're actually pushing back into the ear canal and visible when you look into their ears. I thought that was a pretty crazy image. But with that out of the way, we can take a tour of some of the owls of the United States. And I decided we'd start with our local species that we're all familiar with. We have barred, great horned, saw-whet, long-eared, short-eared, and then more rarely, snowy and barn owls here in Iowa. So first off, our most common owl, barred owl. This is the most common owl in all of North America. It's our standard, backyard woods owl. They average about 1.5 pounds, pretty small owls, and they're extremely successful. And they're rapid invaders, rapid spreaders. They're very adaptable. And humans have actually given these owls a huge boost. They used to be confined primarily east of the Missouri River, and the Great Plains was an ecological boundary to barred owls because they need pretty dense woodland stands to roost and breed in and stay safe from larger diurnal predators like red-tailed hawks and golden eagles and things like that. And as European settlers moved into the Great Plains, we established farmsteads, we diverted rivers and irrigated a lot of the prairie, we stopped a lot of wildfires, and a lot more trees are growing in the Great Plains than there were 300 years ago. And so barred owls love it. They can roost, they can hide, they can be safe, and they've shot all the way across the United States to the Rocky Mountains in the West. And they're actually becoming kind of a problem over there, but I'll talk about that later. There's currently 3 subspecies in the United States that are recognized. The northern barred owl, which is what we're familiar with. And then there's a Florida barred owl and a Texas barred owl, which is pretty unique because it's a nice rusty cinnamon color. Barred owls use pretty large ranges. They average at about a 700-acre range, which I find pretty surprising because I've gone into little patches of woodland and seen 3 or 4 barred owls all together. So they must either be tolerating each other, or maybe they're family and giving the yearlings a chance to get their feet underneath them or their wings underneath them before they kick them out. But they have quite large ranges, and their diet is also very interesting. So like most owls, their preferred prey is usually small rodents, and barred owls almost exclusively eat 1 ounce to 2 ounce size rodents, so voles and mice and things like that. But they've been very thoroughly studied, and some scientific studies have found over 200 to 300 species of animal in a barred owl's diet. And one of the most shocking examples was there was an owl shot, and I believe it was the late 1800s, a barred owl. And when they were dissecting it for a museum skin, they opened up its stomach, and in its stomach contents, they found a long-eared owl that had been swallowed and chewed up and eaten. And they're like, well, we're not going to stop there. And so they opened up the long-eared owl inside of the barred owl, and inside the long-eared owl, they found a saw-whet owl that had been partially digested. So it was a little turducken of owls, an owl ducking 3 levels down. And so owls are very powerful predators, and they're not above preying on other species of owls, and they do so pretty frequently. And nothing is more true of being an owl hunter than the great horned owl. Great horned owls are some of the fiercest species of birds we have in North America. Early people who studied them called them winged tigers because of their orange coloration with the black stripes. And they're also they're ferocious predators. They're our largest regularly occurring owl in Iowa. They average 3 to 4 pounds. Females can be a little bit bigger sometimes. And they're exceptionally early nesters. Their great horned owls are sitting on nests right now in this horrible snowstorm we just got. And they're hunkered down, keeping their chicks warm. I believe about this time of year, they already have eggs hatched with chicks. So they're already well into raising their next nestlings. And they are intraspecific predators. They will go after almost anything they can kill, and that includes things up to the size of bald eagles. There are reports of great horned owls killing adult bald eagles on nests. They'll fly by in the middle of the night and nail them in the back of the head and the neck and sometimes kill them or take nearly fully grown fledglings. They're very powerful predators. And although they will go that far, their normal prey is usually lagomorphs, so rabbits, hares, things like that. Squirrels are often on the menu. And we're familiar with them being an owl of the eastern United States, but they have a very impressive range all the way from northern Alaska down to northern Argentina and South America, which I did not know prior to making this presentation. I just assumed they kind of fizzled out in like northern Mexico or something, but they're all the way down to Argentina. So they're very, very successful, very fierce predators. And this is an interesting little question I'll pose to all you. If you were to look at these three species of owl, snowy owl, great horned owl, and Eurasian eagle owl, what would you suppose the great horned owl's closest living relative among these three birds is? And, you know, logic would make you say, okay, Eurasian eagle owl, it's looks pretty much exactly the same as a great horned owl. It's just the Eurasian version of our great horned owl. And surprisingly, these are all members of the genus Bubo. That's the group they're in. And great horned owl's closest living relative, actually very closely related, is the snowy owl. And the Eurasian eagle owl is substantially more distantly related than the snowy owl. And this is a case of homology versus convergent evolution. So the structures that make us think a great horned owl and a Eurasian eagle owl look identical are homologous structures. They evolved because these owls do very similar things in very similar habitats in very similar parts of the world. That shape and that color and that look works well for being a large owl in a mixed forest in, you know, middle latitude environments. Snowy owls, although very closely related to great horned owls, chose a different path. And they're like, we're going to go far up north and we're going to be an Arctic bird. So they had to change their appearance very quickly in order to survive in that environment. And so they look quite a bit different to us, even though genetically they're very, very similar to great horned owls. And this is a similar thing that's happened with grizzly bears and polar bears. They're very closely related. They can still interbreed easily if they come into contact with each other, but polar bears changed pretty drastically to adapt or to evolve into a Arctic climate. And so they look very different to us than grizzly bears do. Now, one of our cutest owls, the northern saw-whet. They have a much smaller population than the barred or the great horned owl. There's only about 200,000 to 600,000 estimated in the US and Canada. They're very tiny. They average only about 3 ounces. And an interesting fact about these guys is that the females are actually polyamorous. When there's a successful, very abundant breeding season, they will mate with a male, raise a clutch of eggs, and once they're raised, they will go find a separate new male, have another clutch of eggs, raise a new set. And it's thought this is an adaptation to increase genetic diversity amongst groups. And so if they have a really good season, they'll mate with 3 or 4 males in one season and have a different clutch of eggs for each male, and then raise them all out and send them out. These owls have a much more strict dietary preference. They're almost purely mammalian. This is partially due to the fact that they're so small, they can't really catch much other than a field mouse or a vole. That's about as big of an animal as they can tackle. And they're primarily found in northern, colder climates. And so little mammals are the only things that are active year-round for them to feed on. And this is one I took a photo of in Hickory Hill Park. It's kind of been a local legend owl. He or she and maybe a friend or two have been coming back to Hickory Hill Park for the last 4 or 5 years now, at least since I've known about it. But he's probably there right now, chilling in a tree, waiting out the storm, and then hopefully they'll be back again next year. And next up is one of our Iowa specialty owls, the short-eared owl. These are prairie and grassland specialist owls. They like big open areas, and they are prolific wanderers and travelers. Short-eared owls disperse very easily, and they can fly long distances. And this is actually the only species of owl to independently make it to the Hawaiian Islands. Without the aid of humans, these owls made it to the Hawaiian Islands. It's about a 2,500-mile flight. And they are established on all of the major Hawaiian Islands now, and they're the only owl species in Hawaii. And other than Australia and Antarctica, these owls have colonized pretty much everywhere on Earth. Short-eared owls can be found in Africa, they can be found in Asia, they can be found in South America, everywhere. They're very good travelers. And one of the most interesting things and most helpful things to identify the species in the field is that they have a very diagnostic flight pattern. They're often described as having a moth-like or bat-like flight. They're very flobby. So if you see a short-eared owl, and if you see a bird at dusk that looks like it's drunk, it's kind of like flopping very erratically, a slow wing beat, then a few fast ones, then a slow one, then a random turn. It's probably going to be a short-eared owl. They have a very floppy, goofy flight pattern, which makes identifying them at a distance very easy. Then we have one of our more common owls, the eastern screech owl. They're quite common, but very, very hard to detect. They're very secretive. They're pretty strictly nocturnal. They're very small, and they're very, very well camouflaged. Their plumage looks almost exactly like the bark of the tree they're sitting in. And unless you're really paying attention and really checking every nook and cranny, you've probably walked by half a dozen screech owls in the last few years walking in the woods. And I know I have, even though I've been looking for them. In 7 years of birding pretty hard in Iowa and the rest of the United States, I've only seen 3 eastern screech owls. One in Iowa, one in Florida, and one in South Texas. So I've never seen more than 1 screech owl in a state before. So maybe someday I'll get better at finding them. They're pretty small. They average about 6 ounces in mass. And surprisingly, their primary food source is actually insects. In the warmer months, they've done studies where over 50 to 60% of a screech owl's prey taken in the course of a summer is bugs. And they actually prefer insects over the mammalian prey most of the time. They also come in 2 nice color morphs, and they have a gray morph and a red morph. The gray morph is more common in the northern end of their range, and the red morph becomes more common as you head south to like Florida and the Gulf Coast states. This is also a great owl to attract to your yards. They love nest boxes. They use nest boxes pretty regularly. And so you can look up plans on Google and make boxes for these guys. And if you're lucky, they'll come live in your backyard. And next, my favorite owl, and I think in the whole country, maybe in the world, although I probably don't know all the species of owl in the world, the long-eared owl. I love these guys. I think they're very cool. They're very graceful in flight. They're very striking. They have very bright eyes. They average about 10 ounces and have a 3 to 3.5 foot long wingspan. They're pretty long and lean for owls. They're not very heavy, and they're very hard to find. They're very secretive owls. They have been described by early naturalists. They were describing the way these birds roost, and they said, find the darkest, dankest, deepest, thorniest bush, and that's where the long-eared owls will be. They pick very secluded daytime roosts, which makes finding them pretty hard. They're also nomadic and non-territorial. So from year to year, they will change where they prefer to go. If there's a lot of long-eared owls in one grove one year, you'll never know if they're going to be back next year. They might choose to spot 200 miles away next year, and they scatter to the wind. They don't have regular migration patterns. They just kind of go where they go. However, being non-territorial does lead to some interesting events. And occasionally, long-eared owls will form mega roosts, where more than one owl will find each other and share the same roosting area because it's so nice, so close to food, so well hidden. And in fact, this photo here was a photo I took of a mega roost I was told about in south central Iowa that had about 30 long-eared owls all roosting in maybe a 20 by 20 yard section of willow trees. And I realized this as I walked in, and one owl popped out of a bush right in front of me, and I froze. I'm like, oh my God, that was a long-eared owl. That's crazy. And when I stopped to take a closer look, I noticed eyes all around me in bushes and branches. There was 2 or 3 owls on one branch, one in a bush, one over there, one in the grass. And I took one more step to back up because I realized I had intruded into an area. And of course, I stepped on a stick, and 20 owls burst out, circled around. They didn't go anywhere. They just circled around me and landed on the branches all around me, which for a photographer was a pretty awesome day. So I got a lot of really good photos I'll share with you in a second. But it was one of my most favorite birding experiences in my entire life. Another cool thing about these guys is, of course, what they're named for. Their namesake is the long-eared owl. They have very exaggerated ear tufts. And it's thought that these are used perhaps to indicate emotion or signaling with other members of their species. So up might mean agitated or alert, laid back might mean relaxed or submissive. we don't speak long-eared owl. It's just the leading hypothesis for what those long ears are for, but they think it's for communication amongst owls. And here are some of the photos from that day when I found the huge flock of long-eared owls. Really, really crazy day. This one, the big photo of him looking so intense was because there's a blue jay right over my shoulders. And you notice he's not looking directly at the camera. He's just slightly over my left shoulder because there was a blue jay and a hairy woodpecker that were dive bombing him relentlessly because they found him and they were picking on him, and he was keeping a close eye on that woodpecker in case it made another pass. He was going to try to grab it, but they didn't go for him again. And then in the bottom right here, a really cool shot I got that day was an owl, a long-eared owl, closing its secondary eyelids, its nictitating membranes that they can use to close and clean their eyes while keeping their eyes open. So I think this time it was using that nictitating membrane to clean its eyes and keep it moist, but also to keep an eye on me and not have its eyes closed and, you know, be vulnerable. That's a pretty cool experience all around. And now we get into our really truly rare Iowan owls. The snowy owl. This is the largest owl in North America. Females can go up over 6 pounds and have a 6-foot wingspan. So they're very, very big birds, very powerful hunters. They're pretty scarce, as most Arctic animals are. There's low prey density and low predator density in respect to that. So there's only about 100,000 snowy owls globally. And a really cool thing with snowy owls is that you can age them and sex them pretty effectively based on their plumage. And it's pretty easy to identify in the field. The snowiest white, the purest white individuals are adult males, and the dark, heavily barred, black splotched birds are adult females. And then juveniles of both sexes kind of fall in this intermediate range of lightly flecked with black and gray. So this bird here is a adult female. I photographed this one just outside of North Liberty. I think it was about 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. Getting hard to remember all the years now, but this was what was called an eruption year. So snowy owls are relatively nomadic, and when times are good, they stay put, and when times are bad, they don't. And what usually happens during an eruption year for these owls is there's an incredibly successful year up north in their core range in the Arctic. And the adults eat really well. They have lots of babies. They have a huge clutch. All those babies grow up healthily because they have plenty of food for mom and dad. And then suddenly there's way too many snowy owls for the amount of territory that they can stake out. So the adult dominant birds push out all these youngsters, and the only way to go is south because all the territories up north, all the prime territories have been taken. So all these young owls flood south looking for new territories and new food sources. And sometimes they go a little bit too far south and come all the way down to Iowa. And that's what we would call an eruption year, when we can find snowy owls as far south as Nebraska, and some are even reported in California and Texas in these crazy eruption years. But we haven't had one since the year I took this photo, which I think was 2018. And so we're due for another eruption year here coming up soon, and hopefully we'll have more snowy owls to go look for in Iowa. A lot of people are worried about southern eruptive owls because they're usually not doing super well. It's usually a little bit too warm for them. There's usually not great food sources because they're used to hunting lemmings and Alaskan hares, and there's not a lot of those down here. So they're usually a little bit food stressed. But there have been studies done on these owls. And like I said, the reason they're coming down here is usually because there's a really successful Arctic season the season before. So most of these owls are coming down here with a lot of fat. And there's been studies done that when these owls come down here, if they're fully loaded up with fat, they can have up to 40 days worth of fat food reserves, and they can go without eating for over a month and just live off their fat reserves, which is pretty impressive for a bird with such a high metabolism. Then another very, very difficult bird to find in Iowa, the barn owl. It's a threatened species in Iowa, but surprisingly in the rest of the world, they're incredibly common. One of the most common species of owl on Earth. They're just not doing so hot in Iowa. And they're also North America's only member of Chitonidae, which is the other family of owls, the other one being Strigidae, which includes all of the typical owls, the normal owls. I don't know who got to decide what a normal owl versus a not normal owl is. But all the other owls in North America are in the family Strigidae, and then our barn owl is the only member of Titonidae in North America. But like I said, other than Iowa, they're doing great. They're widespread and common worldwide. They've even made it to Australia and the Galapagos Islands. So pretty much anywhere in the world you go, you can find a barn owl. There are 28 subspecies of them worldwide, so lots of variation. Probably going to get split into more than one species here at some point in the future. And they're so adaptable and so successful, they are considered the second most wide-ranging bird on Earth after the peregrine falcon. So barn owls are doing great. They need a hand in Iowa, though. And the primary reason for that is mostly due to loss of small family farms and pesticide use. So in the good old days of Iowa, when there was an old, rotting barn every 100 yards down the road, barn owls loved it. There was lots of places to nest. They had lots of free food, mice everywhere. And with the reduction in abandoned buildings and with larger and larger farms that only, that have nice, clean, big, perfectly sterile, grain bins and everything, barn owls have taken a hit. And then on top of that, pesticides, especially rodenticides that poison rats and mice. Barn owls get a hold of them, and then they eat the rat, and then they die of blood loss, usually internal bleeding. So barn owls have taken a turn for the worse in Iowa, but there is promising signs. I think the last 2 or 3 years in Iowa, there have been an increase in reported barn owl nests to the DNR. So it seems like they're making a little comeback with the reduce in pesticide and rodenticide use. And I've actually seen one barn owl in Iowa. I was lucky enough to go at the Iowa Bird Rehabilitation Center, the Raptor Rehabilitation Center at McBride. They have a male barn owl, which up until last year, they thought was a female barn owl, until one night it started giving mating calls in the middle of the night. And they're like, well, that's weird for a female owl to do that. Like they'd never really gone through like the nitty gritty of getting like a blood test to really determine if it was male or female. They're pretty hard to tell apart in the field, but they assumed it was a female. And it started giving these breeding calls. And they're like, well, that's weird. Females don't usually do that. Maybe it's because it's in captivity and it's, stressed out or something like that. And a couple nights later, out of nowhere, a female barn owl showed up, a wild one, in the trees above its cage and would sit and listen to it call all night. And a birder found out about it and got the word out. And a few people went out one of those nights and sat around until it was almost pitch black and listened to this owl give out its call into the night. And then right as it was about too dark to see, barn owl flew in, landed on the tree branch right above its cage. I got a terrible, terrible photo in super dark light, but that was my first Iowa barn owl and might be my last one. You never know. But I got this photo. It's a much better photo in southern Arizona, staying at an Airbnb that was owned by this old ranching man who was about 5'2", about the smallest man I've ever seen in my life. And he was a rough and tough real cowboy. He had a bunch of steers out in his back 40, and he was riding horses around whenever we saw him. But he saw us leaving the Airbnb one morning with binoculars, and he's like, you guys like birds, huh? We're like, yeah. And he's like, well, I should show you my owls. We're like, well, of course, if you've got owls. Like, what do you mean, are your owls? And he's like, well, I've got a family of Western screech owls in my backyard in a tree, and I've got an abandoned house on my property that a couple barn owls live in. So I'll go show you those. So we hopped in his old pickup truck, and he drove out into the middle of the desert, and luckily didn't take us out there and shoot us. Took us out into the desert, and we found just a little blue house out in the middle of a field. And he said, watch out for rattlesnakes. And he just pounded on the front door, and a barn owl shot out the back window and landed in a tree. And we took some photos of it, and it checked the area out, saw it wasn't a big deal, and flew right back in the window back to sleep. So that was a really, really bizarre but very cool experience to see a barn owl in Arizona like that. And now we'll move on from our typical owls of Iowa to owls of the north. So these are the specialty owls of Canada and the boreal forest. This is the great gray owl, northern hawk owl, and the boreal owl. So the great gray owl, this is our largest owl dimension-wise in North America. They're a lot lighter than snowy owls, but physically looking at one, they look the biggest, but they're all fluff, as we discussed earlier. They're just a bunch of air. They range primarily in Canada and Russia, so these are across Eurasia, and they usually only come as far south as northernmost Minnesota and the northern Rocky Mountains. And as you can see by the eyes, it's got yellow irises, and this is a pretty regular diurnal hunter. They hunt during the day a lot. They're not super active at night. They also have some of the smaller eyes in comparison to body size for most owls. And they make up for that by having a huge facial disc. They have a really pronounced facial disc, so their hearing is exceptional, and they rely on that a lot when they're hunting. This is also kind of the poster child bird for a famous birding area not too far away from here, Zaxim Bog. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this place. It's an awesome place. I've been there 3 out of the last 5 winters, and it's a really magical place. I took this photo there of a great gray owl. I was just driving down the highway, and one flew and landed on a pine tree just like 6 feet off the side of the road. I just pulled over, got out of my car, didn't even look at me, just looking in the ditch for voles. Couldn't be bothered, not a care in the world. Took a bunch of photos until a semi truck honked its horn at me. It's about hit me from behind, and then I decided to keep moving on. But they're really cool owls, and Zaxim Bog is definitely a top tier place to go if you're looking for a birding excursion in the 6 to 7 hour drive range. And some more photos of great gray owls I got that year, because this was the first year I was there. I had a very lucky year, and I found, I think, 6 or 7 great gray owls in the space of 3 days. So it was a very cool couple of days of looking for owls. And the number one, the real prize of northern Minnesota for bird watchers is this bird, the boreal owl. It's about 10 inches long and 6 ounces in weight. It's basically like a sawwhat owl, but 50% bigger and 50% meaner. They're one of the most sought after birds in North America for bird watchers. They're very hard to find. They're very secretive. Most of the time, they're in very dense coniferous forest, far away from the public eye. And they're so secretive, in fact, they were not known to even be breeding in the United States until about 1970, when they were found to be breeding in most of the northern Rockies. This is another bird that's a specialty of Zaxim Bog. They're still extremely scarce up there, but I actually saw this bird in a very unique series of events. I was birding in Zaxim Bog, heard tales that there was a boreal owl in a park nearby, and I was like, well, I gotta go chase that down. I've seen the great gray owls. I've had a good time here. I really want to see a boreal owl. Like, what are the chances I'll ever see one again? So I drove out to this park to look for the owl, and I walked into a park that was 1,500 acres of just conifer forest. I was like, well, I don't think I'm going to find an owl the size of a Nerf football on 1,500 acres of forest by myself. But I was like, I'll give it the old college try. So I hiked around and I froze my butt off. It was about negative 16 degrees. And I hiked for 2 hours, and my hands were frozen solid. My face was bright red. And I was like, I got to throw in the towel. I don't have the skills. So I was hiking out. And as I was hiking out, a lady and her family were walking in, and she noticed my big zoom lens on my camera hanging off my shoulder. And she's like, well, what are you doing with that? Looking for birds? And I said, I am. I was looking for an owl here, actually. And she's like, well, was it a little owl? I said, yeah, it was a little owl. And she's like, well, I haven't seen a little owl here, but when I was driving in, I saw a little owl on the side of the road, and some guy was taking a picture with a cell phone. I was like, oh, okay. Do you happen to remember where it was? She was like, yeah, it was mile marker 312 on the left side of the road on the north shore of Lake Superior. She's like, it's about 30 minutes away. I was like, okay, I've already come this far. I might as well drive up there and see what this is about. So I hopped in the car, drove down the road at mile marker 312. I looked out the left side of the car, and there was a boreal owl sitting on a branch about 4 feet off the ground and 3 feet off the edge of the highway, and just in some guy's front yard. And I stepped out, and he was in his front yard pointing at it, talking to another birder who had stopped. And I was like, you the guy with the boreal owl? And he's like, I guess. I just saw it this morning, and someone stopped their car to come take a look at it. So it was a 1 in a million series of events, but I got an awesome encounter with it, and it was great. And the final bird of the northern boreal forest, this is the northern hawk owl. This is another very unique owl. It has a very unusual shape for an owl. There's a reason it's called the hawk owl. It's got very long pointed wings and a very long tail and a relatively small head for an owl. It's thought that it's kind of converging on the shape of a daytime raptor, like a hawk, to fill that ecological niche in its environment. Native to the same areas as the boreal owl and the great gray owl, these can be found in Saxon bog as well. Their primary prey source is actually young snowshoe hares, which I found pretty interesting because these aren't very big owls. They're probably only about a pound in weight. They're smaller than a barred owl, but they regularly take snowshoe hares that can weigh 5-6 pounds. So pretty impressive prey for such a small owl. But they will also take foals and things like that. This one was also photographed in Saxon bog. Now we'll move away from the cold northern reaches to owls of the Southwest and Western USA. There's a lot of species of owls in the Western USA. Northern pygmy owl, whiskered screech owl, western screech owl, burrowing owl, flammulated owl, ferruginous pygmy owl, and elf owl. So 7, if I can count those right, species of owl in the Western US. And a lot of them have very restricted ranges and are very remote. So finding them is interesting. First up, I have the western screech owl. This is the western version of our eastern screech owl. They're almost identical. They're very hard to tell apart. One of the few reliable characteristics is that their beak is actually a nice dark grayish black. And in eastern screech owl, it's yellowish green. So that's one of the few things you can visually see on an adult to differentiate them. This little guy is a juvenile owl that I found at that same Airbnb with the cowboy owner who said, "You guys like birds? I got 2 screech owls and 3 babies in my oak tree in the backyard." And he walked us around the backyard. He said, "You can swim in my pool if you want. It's getting, it's pretty hot out, but if you want to swim in the pool, you can swim in the pool." And he said, "There's the owls." And he pointed up to a tree branch, and there was 5 owls lined up, a parent on each end and 3 babies in the middle. And we're like, how could it get any easier than that? It's like, that's perfect. So got great photos of western screech owls, adults and juveniles. They develop even more impressive camouflage as they age. And we probably would have never seen another one in the whole trip down to Southern Arizona unless this guy showed us his. So that was pretty nice. The other great way to differentiate western from eastern screech owls is their call. Like a lot of birds that are difficult to tell apart visually, the song is usually your best bet. And western and eastern screech owls have some of the most unique calls of any owl or any bird in the world, I think. The western screech owl has what's called a bouncy ball call, which is very similar to what a field sparrow sounds like, kind of like dropping a ball bearing. It goes doing, 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 kind of increases frequency. So the western screech owl goes and kind of trails off into a faster series of toots, while the eastern screech owl does a call that is described by some people as a pony on helium. So it does a high-pitched whinny like, kind of like that. It is a very funny little whinnied call. And so that's a great way to differentiate the two. And then, of course, range. These guys range mostly west of the Rocky Mountains, and they're pretty common in southern Arizona, although most of the time you just get to hear them, you don't get to see them. So this was a pretty cool experience to see these guys up close. And next, we have the burrowing owl. These are another very unique owl. They're the only terrestrial owl we have in North America. And they have really long legs, and they prefer to run around and burrow instead of fly away from danger. They're also diurnal. They spend most of their active hours in the early morning or late afternoon, but while the sun's still up, they have those yellow eyes. They're out during the day. They're usually communal with prairie dogs, so your best bet at finding these guys is to find prairie dog colonies. And they're usually posted up on little prairie dog mounds because they're not very good diggers, so they need to steal prairie dog holes for themselves. So they hang out with them. There's a group in southern Florida, and then there's another group in the western US and Colorado in that area. And they're right now considered subspecies, although there's some people who think they should be split into their own species, a southern Florida burrowing owl and a Colorado burrowing owl. There's also burrowing owls throughout the Caribbean. So there's lots of subspecies. And actually, until relatively recently in geological history, there were a lot of similar extinct species of owl that shared this kind of general shape and morphology. They were called the stilt owls. And there were some in Hawaii, actually. There was a bunch of owls in Hawaii that were very long-legged ground-dwelling owls that went extinct before humans got there. These went extinct thousands of years ago. And there were also some giant stilt owls in Cuba and in the Caribbean islands. And this species, Ornamengalonyx, was up to 4 feet tall, and it lived in Cuba thousands of years ago, but it's since gone extinct. But that would have been a very cool owl to see. See a burrowing owl that's, as tall as a 10-year-old kid would have been pretty wild. And we have the ferruginous pygmy owl. So this is one of our smaller owls in the United States. It's very range restricted in the US. It's only present in the very southern tip of the United States and the southern tip of Texas and Arizona. And it's endangered in the US due to that small range, but in Central America, it's very common, a lot easier to see in Central America than it is in the US. But one of the few places you can see this bird reliably is in a place called King Ranch in southern Texas. King Ranch is a privately owned ranch, and it's the largest privately owned ranch in the world. Right now, it's, I think, at about 800,000 acres, but at its peak, it was over 1 million acres in size. So it's larger than Rhode Island, larger than the state of Rhode Island. It's owned by one family. And there's a famous story about King Ranch that early on in its history, the owner went to Mexico and proposed an entire town in Mexico to pick up their roots and move the entire town to King Ranch to work on King Ranch because they needed like 12,000 workers to manage the ranch. So the entire town migrated from Mexico to King Ranch to work on King Ranch. Everyone, it was a huge place, but now it's become an excellent case for ranches as conservation. None of that land has been developed very much. The most they do is import a few weird African antelopes or gazelles for wild game hunts. But other than that, most of the habitat is untouched. So it's 800,000 acres of land that's never been developed into, supermarkets or cities or anything like that. And it's a great haven for wildlife. And King Ranch has capitalized that and runs bird watching tours. And it's one of the few places in the US you can reliably see ferruginous pygmy owl is on the King Ranch birding tour. And I would highly recommend it. I did it. They're kind of expensive, but it was a really fun full day of birding, and we saw lots of cool species. Really cool trip. And now we'll bot back to the screech owls for our third and final screech owl of the United States. This is the whiskered screech owl. It's the smallest screech owl. It's only about 3 ounces. And these are primarily found in the southern oak forest canyons of southern Arizona. These really prefer oak forests for some reason or another. Their diet is almost exclusively insects, which is also strange. Year round, they live in a warm climate, relatively year round, so they can eat insects all through the year. Usually, I was expecting these to be mammal eaters since they prefer oak forests. I figured, hey, oak's got a lot of acorns. There's going to be a lot of rodents and squirrels. They must eat those. They like bugs. I don't know. Interesting. But they also have a very unique call, just like the other 2 screech owl species in the US. They have a tooting call that's described as Morse code. So they go doot, 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 doot. So just a random jumble of syllables that kind of sound like Morse code out in the woods. And they're pretty impressive. They can throw that call and make it sound like it's coming from different areas of the woods. So when I was searching for this guy, it was throwing its call behind me, and I was standing under the tree it was in with 2 of my other bird watching friends looking for this thing. And I was like, I hear it. It's like 30 feet behind us. And Brandon, who was there with me, said, I don't think so. I think it's right above your head. And he had a flashlight and he pointed up there, and it was maybe 4 feet over my head, making that call sounding like it was 30 feet behind me. So we were turned around, lost in the dark. We were thinking a mountain lion was going to attack us, but we got it and we got out of there alive. Another interesting feature of this bird, how it got its name, the whiskered screech owl. If you look really closely at this photo, you can see the little fringes, the little whisker-like feathers just on the edges of its facial disc. And they're probably used for feeling objects in the dark as they're flying through dense brush. They can use those whiskers to feel obstructions as they're moving around in the dark. And then we have the northern pygmy owl, a relative of the ferruginous pygmy owl down in South Texas. This guy is in Colorado and California and most of the western US, all the way up into northern Canada. Pretty small, averages about 6 inches in length and 3 or 4 ounces in weight. An interesting thing about this owl is that it's a pretty large proportion of its diet is birds. And this is, most other owls will take birds occasionally here and there, all the way from great horned owls to saw-whet owls. But this bird will take up to 30 to 40% of its diet is small passerine birds like chickadees and titmice and waxwings. Another interesting thing is that they might compromise 2 species in the United States. So most of the other ornithological communities in the world already recognize the northern pygmy owl as being 2 different species. The northern pygmy owl, which is in California and Colorado and Canada, and then the group that is in Mexico and southern Arizona and New Mexico has been named the mountain pygmy owl. The American Ornithological Union has not, fallen in line yet and split them into 2 species, but it's probably coming, in the next few years. For some reason, the United States always seems to lag behind the rest of the world in recognizing species splits. I don't know why, or maybe we're more careful, maybe, I don't know. So maybe in the future, there'll be 20 species of owl in the United States for me to go find, because I've only seen the northern pygmy owl, not the mountain pygmy owl. So maybe that'll be another target for me here pretty soon. And this bird is also an accomplished ventriloquist. I learned this firsthand. I was looking for one of these owls with old legendary Iowa birder Carl Bendorf, who now lives in Western Colorado. And he heard I was coming out there to do a little bit of birding. And he said, well, why don't I show you around? It's my backyard. I know all the best spots. So I had a great day bird watching with him. And he's like, I know a pretty good spot where I think we can find a northern pygmy owl. So we went out, hiked all the way around there, and I heard, just very faintly, another one of the perks of being a young bird watcher, my ears are still good, at least kind of good. I'm bad at identifying songs, but I can at least hear them. So I heard the faintest little, just a faint little hoot. And I was like, oh, Carl, I think I hear the northern pygmy owl, but it's got to be 2 miles up the canyon. Like, we're not going to hike all the way up that slope. It was on the edge of a mountain. We're like, we're not going to get up there to see that. Like, it's miles away. And he's like, I bet you're wrong. I bet it's in the tree right there. And he pointed to the nearest conifer tree. And I was like, in my head, I was like, I've got too much respect for Carl, but I'm like, you're full of crap, man. There's no way. There's no way it's right there. It's miles away. And we walked up to the tree, stood underneath it, and it called again. And I'm like, no, it's half a mile up the slope. Not a chance. And he just points right to the top of the tree and he's like, take a closer look. And I looked straight up and there it was. And it was making just a call that was so soft sounding. It sounded like a call that was very loud and you were hearing it from far away, but it was a call that was just very soft and you were hearing it very close. And it really, really confused me. But I learned my lesson there, and experience trumps enthusiasm sometimes. So we didn't have to hike, which was nice. So it's right there. So that was pretty great. And you're probably thinking, we're getting a lot of owls on this list. We've got a few more to go, but I thought I'd take a quick break just to show you just how many owls are out there in the world. We have 19 species in the United States and Canada combined. So everything north of that line of US and Mexico has 19 owls total, and there are about 260 species of owl in the world. So we're actually living in a pretty scarce area for owls globally. And Central America, South America, Central Africa, and Southern Asia, tons of owls. I think Central America alone has, I think, 10 more species of owl than all of the United States and Canada combined. So there's a lot out there, and I've got 18 of 260 now, so I got a long ways to go if I'm going to get them all. And now we're going to move on to what's probably the rarest owl that has its range in the United States. The other owls I discussed being rare were mostly because just a little sliver of their range was in the US and most of it was in a different country. Spotted owls are almost exclusively in the United States, and they're very, very rare. They're about 17 inches long and about 1.5 pounds, slightly smaller than a barred owl. And barred owls are actually their greatest competition. These owls are very closely related to barred owls, but they live in areas that are much less ecologically bountiful. So their home ranges are very large. They can occupy home ranges up to 14,000 acres for each bird. And they are very slow breeders. They only breed on average once every 2 years, and each breeding attempt is only successful about 60% of the time. So these birds do not reproduce very often. They're more docile than barred owls, and they're smaller. And barred owls, now that they've used that forest corridor across the plains that we as humans built for them, they've reached the range of the spotted owl in the west, and they are out competing them ferociously. They're eating prey, they're taking prey out from them, they're out competing them for nesting sites, they're pushing them out, they're outright killing them in conflict sometimes and eating them. And in some portions of the northern Rocky Mountains, there's actually barred owl hit squads that go out and kill as many barred owls as they can find in a night to give the spotted owls a chance to recover their territory where they used to live, because barred owls have just completely extirpated them from their native ranges. And we're not worried about barred owls going extinct. There's millions of them, but spotted owls are kind of teetering on the verge of getting pushed out by barred owls and replaced. So that's a conservation kind of battle that's raging on there. Is, you know, it's hard to go out and kill an owl, and nobody wants to do it, but there are people who have deemed that saving the spotted owl is more important than a few wayward barred owls who have, you know, kind of gone beyond their means and gone too far west. But I actually got to see this owl in southern Arizona, and it was really special because it was a pair, a mother and a father, who had recently fledged one recently fledged baby who was sitting up in a tree and just getting its first flight feathers in. And it was really, really cool to see. Very endangered bird, and probably the only one I'll ever see. Now, the smallest owl in North America, elf owl. This is a really, really cute little owl. This is the smallest owl on the entire planet. We get to have it here in the southern US. They average only 5 inches long and 1.5 ounces, which is almost exactly the size of a house sparrow. So these guys are incredibly tiny. They're native in southern Texas and southern New Mexico and Arizona. I saw this guy in the lower Rio Grande Valley of southern Texas in Benson Rio Grande State Park. There's kind of a semi-famous elf owl that's been living in a telephone pole right at the front entrance to this park for the last 10 or so years. Nobody knows if this is the same adult owl or if it's one of its offspring from years gone by. But they use this owl, and almost every night it draws a huge crowd during peak birding season. I showed up about an hour early because I was a little too anxious that I was going to miss it. So I showed up an hour before sunrise, and I stood in front of this pole for an hour. And then slowly all the regulars who live in the area showed up, like, you know, just on time, 5 minutes before showtime. And by the time this thing poked its head out of the hole, there was 40 or 50 people gathered up in lawn chairs waiting for him to make an appearance. So it was quite a show. But they normally nest in saguaro cacti or woodpecker holes, which is what this one's doing here. It stole a woodpecker hole in this telephone pole, and it actually had to fight off a couple red-bellied woodpeckers while I was watching, which is kind of surprising because red-bellied woodpecker is like 3 times the size of this owl. It's pretty funny to see an owl that could get like grabbed by a woodpecker and tossed out of the hole, but it was fierce, and it held its own and kept its nest safe. And when they're captured by banders or scientists studying them, they're often known to feign death. They'll play dead, presumably just because they're so small and pathetic, they can't really do anything else. They can't fight back. And they know if something big's got me, I'll just flop and play dead, and it might drop me for a second and give me a chance to bolt. So elf owls are really neat. I've gotten to see one in southern Texas and one in southern Arizona, just by lucky happenstance. We were out looking for a rare bird, buff-colored nightjar in southern Arizona, way out in the canyons. And we rolled up to the spot where we were supposed to look, and there was an elf owl sitting at the top of the bush, and our car lights illuminated it for a split second, and it bolted away. So now, my arch nemesis, the final owl. This is number 19 of all the 19 owls in the United States, and the only one I have never seen, the flammulated owl. It's our second smallest owl in the U.S., just over 2 ounces in weight. It's strictly nocturnal, pure black eyes. This is another owl that's almost exclusively an insectivore. They almost eat nothing but insects for most of the year. Previously, they were thought to be pretty rare in the United States. They are relatively rare. That's mostly due to they have a very scattered, disjunct range in the Western United States. In this range map, you can see there's not really any single location you can kind of go and get a guaranteed spot you're going to see a flame-wheeled owl. They're just kind of here and there, top of this mountain peak, top of that mountain peak. But there was recently discovered a population just outside of Salt Lake City, Utah, that's very, very dense and very easy to see. So someday I'm going to make the journey out there during breeding season in June or July. You can go stay in Salt Lake City, and then just like 45 minutes up the road, they've done flammulated owl surveys and found out that these birds are actually colony nesters. So during breeding season, they will gather in huge groups and sing up and down and call up and down these mountainous roads. And in one 5-mile survey, this group detected 57 different flammulated owls calling in a 5-mile stretch of road in one night. So the range is scattered, but if you know where to go, you got a good chance of finding one. You just got to get that sweet spot, and then hopefully it'll pay off. So someday I'm going to make that trip. I don't know if I'm going to drive all the way out there or have to fly, but you know, us Midwesterners, we have the road tripping spirit. So I might have to make a haul out there next summer and see if I can find one of these guys and get the full set. And now we've gone through all 18 or 19 of the owls, 18 that I've seen in the United States. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about owling as a practice and how to be a good owler. Just like real estate, the 3 L's of owling are location, location, and leaving home at 4 a.m. You got to be willing to get up early if you want to see owls. Either get up early or stay up very, very late. A lot of my birding trips with some of my friends are pretty grueling. We're rarely in bed for more than 4 or 5 hours a night because we're up at 4 a.m. to look for owls. Then we're staying up till midnight to look for more owls. And then I've got friends who like bugs, so they hang up sheets at night and they shine lights on them to try to catch moths at night. So they're up till 2 a.m. And you know, you can't fall asleep when there's flashlights outside your window looking at moths all night. So you're pretty much stuck with 4 hours of sleep a night. But you have to put up with it sometimes to see owls. Another very useful thing in finding owls is playback. Owls are very responsive to sound, and if you play an owl's call, it'll often respond back to you. This is a very useful way to find owls. It's advised not to do this during nesting season because, of course, you can distract owls who are on a nest. They think there's a rival in the area. They'll leave the nest to go fight you off, or they'll waste energy, yada, yada, yada. It's best to avoid playback during peak nesting season. Another challenge of finding owls for photographers, which I am, is they're usually in darkness. You know, you see them in late afternoon when lighting's not very good and you want to get a good photo, but you don't want to really disturb the owl. And there have been some antecedent evidence that flash doesn't really do that much to harm owls if it's used sparingly. You know, like if there's an owl that's getting, you know, flashed by like 20 photographers a night, it's going to suffer because it's going to have a hard time adjusting to the darkness. It's going to have a hard time hunting. But a great couple of things you can do to offset this disturbance is use diffusers and light panels. And I've tried both of these techniques. Diffusers are little plastic covers you can put over your camera's flash, and they basically work like a light softener. They reduce the brightness of the flash and they spread it out over a larger area so it's not a beam straight in the owl's face. That's really useful. And then another even better option are light panels, which are basically just little blocks of LED lights you can mount to the top of your camera. And they basically work like a low beam, wide angle flashlight that just kind of generally illuminates the area in front of it to, you know, afternoons, you know, like late sundown brightness, and lets you take a picture without using a flash at all, which is much better for the owls in general. And then, as I talked about earlier, with owls being very frequent predators of other owls, not disturbing roosts and nests is very important. There are some owls that will tolerate humans very well. Saw-whet owls will almost never flush from a perch. You can I've accidentally walked up to a saw-whet owl and leaned on the tree it's in, and it was 2 feet over my head, and it didn't move a muscle. And then I noticed, I was like, whoa, sorry, and I backed off. Long-eared owls, they see you coming within 30 feet, and they're usually gone. They blast off, and they fly away. And this can be dangerous, especially for smaller owls, because other owls will eat them, and other hawks and raptors will eat them. And this is actually a technique used by owl surveyors when they go out to do surveys for owls. and they play the calls of the owls to see if they can get a call back, they'll start with the smallest species of owl first and work their way up to the biggest species of owl first. Because if you go into the woods and play a great horned owl call, every owl smaller than a great horned owl will be like, mum's the word. They won't make a squeak after that because they're afraid for their lives, because they're like, oh man, there's a great horned owl in the area and it's going to eat me if I make a noise. So they start with the little owls and work their way up to big owls. And this little image here is a video of a northern white-faced owl doing a threat display. I found this on the internet probably when I was 15 years old, well before I was a birder, but it was so cool. I went back and I refound it because this is an owl going from what's a relaxed posture to a stressed posture. And it's a pretty incredible transformation. So I'll play that here. So that's the amount of shape that this owl can change, because it's mostly feathers. Like I said, there's not very much meat in there, but they can adjust the position of those feathers pretty dramatically and take this, it's called an attenuated posture, but it's thought that it's trying to look like a stick or a branch, better blend in with its environment, not look like an owl shape to be preyed on. But it's pretty incredible how rapidly they can change from such a cute little guy to such a creepy looking little gremlin there. And then finally, a brief little overview of some of the best places to owl around the United States and nearby. The mountainous Southwest, the Sky Islands of Arizona, they're called. These are the mountain ranges in Arizona that poke up above the desert floor and stay a lot cooler. These are great places to go look for owls. I've seen 6 species of owls in 7 days in these mountain ranges. The northern boreal forests, especially Zaxxon Bog. I've had 5 species of owl there in just a 3-day weekend, so that's a great place to go look for owls. Here at home, deciduous coniferous forests of the east are very abundant with owls. Most of our common species can be found in just regular old backyard woodlands. Central America has tons of owls, 7 species of screech owls alone in Central America. So if you ever get the chance, go down there. There'll be lots of owls to look for. And then right around here, some of the prime spots to go: cedar groves, undisturbed forest, restored prairies. If you can find habitat, you will find owls eventually. Hickory Hill Park and George Wythe State Park are some of my favorite places to go look for barred owls and northern saw-whet owls. Waterworks Prairie Park is great for great horned owls and occasionally barred owls. And then West Hawkeye and Neil Smith National Wildlife Refuge are pretty famous for their short-eared owl populations. You can also find eastern screech owls and great horned owls there. So those are some of my favorite local spots to go owling throughout the year. And that's all I have for you guys today. We've powered through all 19 owls. If you have any questions about any of those slides, I'm all ears.
I just want to say, Dean, that was fabulous. That was just so interesting. And your photographs are just amazing. It was just wonderful. So are there questions? Just unmute yourself. Just remember to unmute yourself. Well, I want to ask Dean, I don't know if you said this at the beginning. How did you fall in love with owls?
So I always loved birds and wildlife in general. I was always a very, nature forward, nerdy kid who was out, like catching bugs in jars and looking for lizards and salamanders under rocks and things like that. But I got into birding originally in college. Brandon Caswell, another local birder, went to school at the same time I did. He was getting a second degree in geology, which is what I was also getting a degree in. And we went to a field course in Montana. And we were supposed to be doing geology, but as you know, birders always find an excuse to do a little birding on the side. And Brandon, of course, was like, well, we get 1 day off during this field course, just do whatever we want. He's like, I'm going to go bird watching. And I was like, oh, that sounds kind of cool. Do you mind if I come along? And he's like, sure thing, you can come along. So I hopped in the car with him. We drove out into the wilds of Montana and started looking for birds. And the first thing we saw was a peregrine falcon swoop down and do its classic steep dive and nail a magpie out of midair and kill a magpie. And we're like, whoa, that was incredible. And then the next thing we saw was we rounded a corner and there was a, oh God, what species was it? I think it was a barred owl. I think they're in Montana. I can't remember now, but it was an owl of some kind. It was one of the first birds I didn't even write it down because I was too early. I wasn't a bird watcher then, but I was like, we saw an owl and I was like, a peregrine falcon and an owl. This is insane. Is how easy birding is always going to be. And of course, it wasn't.
No.
As I had an exceptional first day. That was my spark birding moment. And then, after that, you're grinding for 5 days to find one kind of sparrow, and it doesn't have the same magic. But that was what originally got me into birding, was that incredible first day, seeing peregrine falcons hunt and seeing all the crazy birds in Montana. That was pretty special.
Yeah. This is fabulous. Fabulous. Wow. And where are you off to next?
My next adventure is we're going, me, Brandon, Mark Brown, and Jaden Bowen are all going to southern Mexico, to Chiapas and Oaxaca. And that'll be my first pretty serious birding adventure out of the US, strictly for birding. And we're going down there the first week of April 1st to April 10th. And I think there's 6 or 7 species of owl down there I haven't seen before. So could be a big chunk of new owls for me down there. And
do you guys know Bob Cecil?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, well, I can't remember exactly where he is,
Mhm.
but he knows a lot about the birds in Mexico.
We'll have to pick his brain. We've been looking for people who are experts and just shooting emails and harassing them for details, because it's a relatively popular birding destination, but nothing like Costa Rica or the places that get birded by a lot of people. So there's a lot of uncharted territory down there. You're like, that looks like a good spot, but nobody's ever been bird watching there. It's not on eBird, so do you waste half a day looking at that spot, or you might find something new? So
I've gone on 2 birding trips in Mexico with Bob Cecil, on the eastern side and on the western side, and he's on the western side. It's where he lives now.
Oh,
and
cool.
Great time, lots of birds.
Yeah, we're pretty excited about it.
Are there any other questions? Because otherwise we'll let Dean go. I can't tell you how interesting this was. It was
it's fascinating.
Awesome to share with you guys. There's nothing I like more than talking about birds for an hour. So I don't get to do it very often without annoying people. So it's a nice change.
All right. Well, I promise none of us were annoyed. It was wonderful.
No, we appreciate it very much.
It was great. I learned a lot.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was just pitched at just the right amount of information, and the photos were wonderful. So thank you. All right. Well, I guess we'll let Dean go, and then.